I welcome you all to the module 4 of this course. So, the module 4 is about the concept of learning, and today we will talk about lecture number 10. Overall, it is lecture number 10, which is titled as Observational Learning or Social Learning. This is the last lecture of this module, but overall this is lecture number 10. So, before we talk about today's lecture, let me give you a brief recap of the last lecture, which was lecture number 9, and this lecture was also part of the same module, that is the under the concept of learning itself. So, in the last lecture we discussed the concept of operant conditioning, the Skinner's operant conditioning, where we discussed the meaning of operant conditioning, what are the processes involved in it, the important concepts such as reinforcement, punishment and so on. We also discussed the concept of schedules of reinforcement, how different schedules, ratio, variable, ratio, interval, variable, fixed and so on, all kinds of combination of schedules of reinforcement and how they impact behavior and so on. At the end we discussed how some of the principles of operant conditioning can be applied in the real world context, such as such as the concept of shaping and how it can be used to train animals and humans and so on. So, these were the things that we discussed in the last lecture. So, we will in today's lecture we will continue the concept of learning, but we will talk about another category of learning which is called as an observational learning, and that is also called as modeling, social learning also. These are the terms that are used mostly in the same context. So, we will look into the concept of observational learning, what are the different processes involved in it. Associated with the observational learning, we will also talk about the concept of self-efficacy. We will also discuss the concept of mirror neurons and how it is related to observational learnings. We will also look into some of the impact of observational learning, particularly in the context of prosocial behavior and some antisocial behaviors. So, let us start today's lecture. Now, this whole concept of observational learning or social learning, one of the most important proponent of this theory was Albert Bandura, who kind of did most of the foundational research in this area. Now, Albert Bandura's work on observational learning basically highlights that human learning occurs through observing and imitating the behavior of others, which is called as modeling by Bandura. So, as we discussed in the last two lectures on the learning itself, one was classical conditioning, second was operant conditioning. They focused on associations. These are all these two concepts were related to associative learning. So, where we learn by associating two things. In case of classical conditioning, typically we associate stimulus response or between two stimulus, and in the case of operant conditioning, we discussed how behaviors are associated with their consequences. But Bandura said lot of human learning in particular, it also is there in animals also, is lot of this learning happens actually through observing others, which he called by modeling. According to Bandura, more of our learning occurs by observational learning as compared to classical and operant conditioning. He said in human learning, observational learning is most important if you compare with even classical and operant conditioning. Those learnings are also there, but comparatively observational learning happens more in the context of human life and so on. Now, in order to understand how observing something we learn and what is the impact of observing something and how we learn through observation, one of the most popular and celebrated experiment in psychology was this Bobo doll experiment. So, one of his famous studies by Bandura and Walters in 1963, children were divided into two groups. So, that this is called Bobo doll experiment. So, there are two groups of children. One group was called experimental group. So, in the experimental group means you introduce some manipulation. So, that you want to see what is the impact of that manipulation on the or whatever the outcome you are trying to see. So, that is called experimental group. In the experimental group, children observe an adult displaying aggressive behavior towards a plastic doll named Bobo, hitting and kicking it while shouting commands like throw him in the air. So, that was the experimental condition. So, children in the experimental group, they observed an adult behaving aggressively with a doll whose name is Bobo. So, adult was hitting, kicking, shouting and so on, all kinds of aggressive behavior the adult was showing. Okay. Original experiment, adult was live doing this kind of actions. In many other versions of the same experiment, Bandura used different conditions such as live modeling was initially done. Then film model means video was shown that a adult is behaving aggressively, and in some conditions cartoon models were behaving aggressively with doll and so on. So, the different conditions were used in the later conditions, but originally the study was where the adult was actually displaying, the live display of aggressive behavior was there. So, that was the experimental conditions. In the control condition, the children did not witness any such aggressive play. So, there was no such the display of aggressive behavior with the Bobo doll. So, that was a neutral condition. So, these two group of children were exposed to different conditions. One was experimental group, one was control group. Later, these both groups of children were allowed to interact with the same doll. So, control group was also, the doll was there, but there was no aggressive behavior. Both the groups were later, then they were put into separate room, and then they were given this same doll to interact and play with. What was the result? The result showed that children in the experimental group, where they witnessed an adult person behaving aggressively with that doll, like kicking, hitting and shouting. These children, when they were given opportunities to play with the same doll later, they displayed significantly more aggression towards the doll as compared to the control group. Control group means these were the children who did not see any such aggression. So, initially they found twice more aggressive than the control group. So, the children who witnessed, who could see that adult was behaving aggressively with the doll, when the same doll was given to them, they were also behaving aggressively. So, that means they learned by observing others. And the control group, they did not see any aggression earlier, when the doll was given, they were not behaving aggressively. And this was true in all the conditions, live, when the live model was showing, when it was shown in the film in the format of films and like video, or in the form of cartoon. In all the condition, the aggression was much higher in the experimental condition as compared to control condition. So, this study demonstrated very clearly the power of observational learning, how people learned by observing. The children immediately learned by observing that the adult was behaving aggressively, so they learned to behave aggressively. Where children imitated the aggressive behavior they had observed in the adult model. Okay? So, this is an example of how experimentally it was proved that how we learn by observing others. So, these were some of the actual images from the experiment, how this was the adult model who was behaving aggressively with the doll, then when later the children was given the same doll, how they were behaving similarly with as they witnessed it with the adult model. These were original experimental picture. So, this is about that how do we learn by observing others. So, in learning by observation, obviously it is not so simple, just like you see and you learn something. So, there are many intricacies involved in it, there are many steps involved in it, we will talk about that. Before that, there is some kind of neurons in our brains which are also promoting this observational learning. Generally, these neurons are called as mirror neurons, which help in imitation and observational learning. So, this mirror neuron is a part of, these are the neurons that are present in the brain in a certain circuit. So, the mirror neurons are the type of neurons that exhibits activity both when an animal performs a specific action and when it is observing other animals performing the same actions. So, these neurons gets activated when you do some actions. So, when you are doing some motor action, something you are doing, you like grasping an object or like walking, whatever it is. So, when you do an action, this same motor gets activated. The same neurons also get activated when you see other people doing the same action, as if like you are doing it. So, when you do it or when you observe others are doing, in both cases this mirror neurons get activated. So, that means when you see, your same neural structure is getting activated as if you are doing it. So, that helps us to learn by observing. So, these neurons provide a neural basis for imitation and observation. That is why we are able to imitate others' behavior. We can just observe someone and learn it by looking at that people. One of the reason is this mirror neurons promotes that imitation. Observational enables organisms to internally mirror other actions. It is almost like you copy the same actions, and this is possible because of this functioning of the mirror neurons. The research conducted by Guwahati and his colleagues in 1990s led to the discovery of these mirror neurons. So, they were doing some experiment with the monkeys, and they kind of accidentally discovered this mirror neurons. So, Rizzollati and his colleagues, they were the initially they kind of discovered these mirror neurons. So, these neurons mirror observed action, hence their name is called mirror neurons. So, their teams. So, Rizzollati and his teams originally studying the motor cortex, some of the neurons in the cortex, particularly in the macaque monkeys, specifically focusing on neurons involved in controlling hand and mouth movements. So, they are kind of doing some research on the kind of neurons that are responsible for hand and mouth movements. So, they are doing some kind of research there. They used microelectrodes to record the activity of individual neurons in the premotor cortex and the inferior parietal lobule of the monkey's brain. So, they are looking at certain specific brain areas and trying to see whether neurons on those areas are responsible for hand and mouth movements in the monkeys. Now, during this experiment, they kind of accidentally discovered these mirror neurons. So, during this experiment, the researcher noticed something unexpected. They found that some of the recorded neurons not only fire when the monkeys perform an action, perform some specific hand and mouth movements, but also fire when monkeys observe researcher or other monkeys performing the same action. So, they found some set of these neurons that they were looking at, they gets fired when the monkeys does some actions with the hands and mouth like grasping some objects. They also found the same set of neurons get activated when they see others grasping the object like experimenter or some other monkey. So, just by observing the same set of neuron get activated as if they are doing it. This phenomena was initially observed in relation to action, particularly related to grasping and some of these actions they observed. So, it was somehow like this. So, let us say this is a particular kind of neuron. So, monkey at rest, it is not a firing. Now, monkey is trying to grasp an object, this particular neuron will fire. Now, what they found, the same neuron gets fired when they observe someone else is grasping the objects. It could be an experimenter or it could be an another monkey. So, the same neuron fire gets activated. So, you see the firing is almost same when they are doing it and when they are observing it. So, these neurons are almost functioning in a similar way. So, that was one of the observation they found which led to this discovery of mirror neurons. This discovery led to propose the existence of mirror neurons. Subsequent research in humans has also provided evidence the similar system in the human brains also. Typically, they use functional magnetic resonance imaging fMRI studies which demonstrated that certain brain areas in humans such as premotor cortex and the inferior parietal lobule show activity both when individual performs action and when they observe the same actions. So, these neurons were typically present in those part of the cortex area. So, this is the some of these areas where these mirror neurons are generally present. So, these are some of the areas of the motor cortex of our brain, inferior parietal lobule, so these are some of the area, motor cortex and so on. So, these are some of the areas where mirror neurons are present and these neurons are responsible for imitating others' actions. When we see something, this gets fired and we kind of learn by looking at others. So, that is also one of the basis of observational learning. Now, obviously, when we talk about these mirror neurons, there is no definitive proof in terms of a specific neurons in a single cell level. These are like network of neurons, not just one or specific cells and so on. So, this mirror neurons often refers to broader concept of network of brain regions, like as we have shown in the figure, there are different regions involved in it. Understanding which like involve in the action of understanding and imitation of behavior rather than solely individual cells. So, these are like network of cells in the different some of the regions of the cortex. They collectively create something called as a mirror system in humans, which are believed to involve these are distributed network of interconnected brain regions rather than isolated mirror neurons. So, in humans it is not just about just specific cells, it is like network of cells in certain interconnected areas in the cortex. Some of the areas I have shown it in the figure. So, this finding of mirror neurons had a lot of implication in understanding different kinds of behavior from the neurological perspective. It provided neural mechanism for understanding how human can understand and mimic the actions of others, like imitation. When you see someone, you can imitate the same behavior. So, mirror neurons are responsible for it. It also contributing to the development of social skills we learn by observing others, language acquisition, ability to empathize with others. We are able to empathize with others is because of the mirror neurons. One of the responsible neural mechanism is that when you see somebody sad, you can also become sad by looking at other sadness. So, that is called empathy, and that is also you kind of mimicking the emotional state of others people. So, that is also possible because of this mirror neurons. A lot of some of the developmental evidences are also available. For example, infants from 8 to 16 months, they imitate new gestures. Even infants start imitating actions of the parents and other people, they start imitating. So, that means this neurons are functional at that stage also. By 12 months, they follow others' gaze. By 14 months, they imitate behavior seen on TVs and other, even on screen also. So, like imitation is very early on, it is available in in an infant also. Mirror neurons activity also explains emotional contagion and empathy. It is because of these mirror neurons we are able to catch the emotions of other people. We are able to empathize with others, understand how others are feeling, and accordingly we can take actions and so on. So, emotional contagion means emotion spread. If your one of your close friend or relative is, let us say, depressed or sad, you also become sad. So, that is like it is spreading from one person to another person. So, that is called emotional contagion, and this is possible because of mirror neurons. People unconsciously mimic others' expression and behaviors. For example, yawning also spreads across humans and animals. Observing pain activates similar brain responses, experiencing it and so on. So, a lot of these behaviors we can kind of neurologically explain through these mirror neurons actions and so on. Obviously, when we talk about brain, and ultimately lot of areas are interconnected and everything together creates lot of things, but some specific areas are more important. So, in this context, some particular mirror neuron cells may be more important in that context. So, from the neurological perspective, when we say observational learning, by learning from observing other people, we learn lot of things. Humans particularly learn lot of things by observing others. Okay. One of the neural mechanism, as I said, is through mirror neurons. Now, let us look into psychologically what are the factors that are responsible for this learning. How do we learn, under what conditions this learning happens, under what condition this happens less and so on. So, what are the important factors in modeling or learning by observing. So, this is also, as we said, this is also called modeling. So, in modeling process at first glance appears simple. An observer model with the primary question being whether the observer will imitate the model section. Whenever we see someone else doing something, the question is, will that person model or mimic the same actions, under what conditions, which factors will facilitate that mimicking and so on. So, answer is not very straightforward. So, it depends on so many factors, lot of factors. Bandura concluded from various versions of the study that there are three important factors crucial for observational learning or modeling. What are those factors? One is, what is the characteristics of the model, whom you are imitating, what is the characteristics of that person, that will determine whether you will mimic that person or will learn from that person or not. So, one is similarity of the observer. The person who is observing and the person who is observed or the model, if they are more similar in certain characteristics, more similar the model is to the observer, the more likely imitation occurs. If you think someone is very similar to you, you are more likely to imitate the behavior of that person, because you think the person is similar. If he can or she can do, why not I can also do that, like similarity in some way creates interest and you are more likely to imitate the behavior of others. So, these are some of the conditions which can kind of facilitate that within the model characteristics of the model. So, one is similarity of the observer, second is complexity of the behavior that is shown by the model. Simple behaviors are more likely to be imitated than complex ones. People are generally more easily they can catch simple actions as compared to if some actions are very complex. Obviously, people will not be able to immediately catch it through observing, it may take time and so on, but simple action one can imitate very easily. Then also it depends on the type of behavior shown by the model. Hostile and aggressive behaviors are more likely to be modeled. So, this is a very dangerous thing that what research shows. People generally model more negative actions, and which has lot of dangerous implications for the behavior that we learn by looking at others, not only in the real world, in the media, TV and movies and so on. People catch those hostile and negative behaviors more. they model it more as compared to good and positive behaviors. So, these are some of the factors within the model itself that they will facilitate the observational learning here. So, one is characteristics of the model, second is attribute of the observer. What are the characteristics of the observer who is observing the model? Some of the factors should be there within that person also, which will facilitate or inhibit the observational learning. One is what is the confidence level of that person. Individuals with lower confidence are more prone to imitation. So, these are some of the factors which are very similar: confidence, self-esteem, competence. Like lower these factors are, person is more likely to imitate. Why? If you see the low competence, low self-esteem, low confidence, that increases the dependency on the others, because you do not have confidence that you can be able to do something. So, you look at others, you try to imitate them. So, your dependency on others increases to learn something, simply because your maybe your self-esteem, your confidence level, your competence is lower. You know? So, if that is low, the chances of modeling and imitating someone else may be higher. Okay? One of the reason is because it creates more dependency on the model to learn something, because you are not confident yourself. Okay? So, that could be some of the factors. Then learning history, individuals rewarded for confronting behaviors are more inclined to imitate. So, what is the history? If they see others people are rewarded for doing something, they are more likely to imitate that. They see if that person is rewarded, if I do that, I will also get reward. So, that what is the history of that, what you have observed in that is also very important. Then obviously, dependency, which we already talked about here, highly dependent individuals are more prone to modeling. If you cannot decide anything on your own, you always depend on someone else to make decision and so on, then you will always look at what others are doing, then you will try to copy that. So, those factors are there. So, those factors will also determine whether the person will imitate or someone else or model someone else action or not. So, this is factors within the observer. Then comes the third factor, what is the consequence of imitating the behavior? What they think, if I do this or imitate this behavior, what will be the result of that? What will be the consequence of the action that I am imitating? Now, generally there can be positive or negative results of an action. So, if an individuals believe that imitating behavior will lead to positive outcome, they are more likely to do so. Accordingly, Bandura, so this is one of the most influential factor whether someone will imitate someone or not. It depends on whether they think if I do this, will I get positive result or negative results. If they think it will give positive result, they are more likely to imitate that behavior. For example, in the Bobodol study that we discussed, some of the children watched as the model who hit the doll was given praise and soda and candy. Another group of children saw the model receive verbal and physical punishment for the same aggressive behavior. So, when this another version of this experiment, children watched, one group watched that when they behave aggressively with the doll, they were rewarded, and in another group watched the model is behaving aggressively with the doll, but they are punished. Then what was the result? The children who observed the punishment displayed significantly less aggression towards the doll than did the children who saw model being reinforced. So, what is the outcome that they think will happen if I do this action? So, that will also influence whether they will imitate that action or not. So, but Bandura said this for observational learning, this reward of an action may not be always necessary to learn something. It may be a facilitator, but it is not absolutely necessary for observational learning to happen. So, Bandura demonstrated that while reinforcement is essential in classical and operant conditioning, which we discussed earlier, it is not always necessary in the observational learning. For example, attention grabbing stimuli like vivid billboards, advertisement or loud noises can influence our learning process. So, when we see a very vivid, very very clear and the big advertisement somewhere in the billboard, even though you are not getting any reward, but you will see and learn that what is written there. So, you will acquire some learning by looking at that, even though there is no reward given to you, or when there is some loud noise that is catching your attention, you will learn something, but there is no apparent reward process here. So, although we may not consciously process this information at that time, we can recall it later, such as recognizing a product from the billboard when we are in the supermarket and so on. Okay? So, we learned by observation, but we are not very conscious at that time, but later our behavior may be influenced by that. So, there was no reward here as such. Bandura also showed that individuals can reinforce their own behavior through self reinforcement. Not necessarily someone else should give reward, you can give yourself your own reward. We evaluate our action, stopping behavior that provide pleasure to that we judge as harmful, while continuing those bring positive reinforcement. So, we can think some kind of self reinforcement also. If you do something, it gives you pleasure, so it is a kind of self reinforcement. So, that can also influence and so on. So, reward has not necessarily should be there for observational learning to happen, but if it is there, it will influence. But in case of classical and operant conditioning, reward was kind of a necessary factor. So, now let us look into the detailed process of observational learning. We discussed some of the factors that are important for observational learning to happen or modeling to happen. Now, let us see how this happens, what is the process involved in it, what is the mechanism involved in it. So, Bandura analyzed the nature of observational learning and found it governed by 4 mechanisms. One is attentional process, then retention process, production process, and the last one is incentive and motivational process. These 4 processes are involved in observational learning. So, when we learn something by observing others, all these 4 processes are involved in it. So, let us look into how they are involved. So, the first one is attentional processes. So, obviously, if you want to learn something, you have to pay attention. If you do not pay attention, how will you learn anything? We cannot learn anything in whatever we have learned, because we paid attention. So, even if you want to learn something from someone else, you have to pay attention what that person is doing. Without that, you cannot learn it. So, attention is always the initial stage of any kind of learning. Without attention, you cannot learn anything. So, attentional stage is where the observer focuses on the model's behavior, which is necessary for effective learning. So, whenever a model is doing some action, here model means any action of someone else that you want to imitate. So, you have to pay attention what that person is doing, how that person is doing, then only you will be able to imitate that action. So, attention is always the first stage. Bandura identified various factors that influence attentional process. Now, whether you pay attention very meticulously or not, it depends on many other factors also. So, one of the thing is characteristics of the model. Model kaisa hai, how that model is, that will catch your attention, So, an observer is more likely to pay attention to someone else action when models are similar to them, as we already said. If the person is very similar to me, I can connect with that person, this is a person very similar. So, he is able to do, I can also do it, some kind of connection is built up because of similarity factors. It may be similarity in background, similarity in education, whatever it is. So, in terms of age, status, gender, appearance and so on, a lot of these factors could determine whether that person is similar to you or not. Okay. So, if you find someone is doing something of similar background, your attention is more likely to go there. Celebrity models, experts and those perceived as confident or attractive often command greater attention. So, that is why people use celebrities in the advertisement, because they catch your attention. People who are attractive, people who are experts, people who are celebrities, generally they catch more attention. So, if those people are doing something, probably you will give more attention to them. Okay. So, attentional process may depend on some of these factors. Also, role of cognitive and perceptual skills are very important. Observer with highly developed cognitive and perceptual skills and a good understanding of the behavior of whatever the model is doing are more likely to pay closer attention. So, if that person who is observing action of another person, if they have better cognitive ability, means better understanding and processing ability, more able to closely look at whatever they understand what is going on there. So, if they have more skills to reproduce that, good understanding skill of whatever behavior they are looking at, they will likely to pay more attention, because they understand what is going on. If you do not understand something, you will not pay attention, you will see, no, I am not able to understand it. Probably you will not pay much attention, but if you understand something, some phenomena, your attention will go there. It is very simple. So, if you understand cricket very well, you will be paying more attention to cricket as a sport, because you understand what is happening there. you understand all the histories and the dynamics of it. If you do not understand a lot of information about, let us say, cricket, you will not have much interest in that. So, your cognitive perceptual skills, that will also determine whether you pay attention or not. So, then another factor is behavioral relevance, that also is relevant in attention. Observer tend to pay greater attention to a model behavior that they perceive are relevant to their own life. So, if you think this action is important for my life, then only you will pay attention. If you think this is not relevant for me, you will not pay attention, even though given all the other things are there. So, when the model behavior is personally relevant or has implications for the observer, they are more likely to focus their attention on it. Whenever they think it is relevant for my life and it has an implication for my life, so they will pay more attention. So, observer pay closer attention to behavior they expect to perform themselves. Whenever they think this behavior is important for me and I probably in future I will have to produce that similar actions, then they will pay more attention because it is relevant to their life and so on. So, relevance also plays important role. Okay? So, this was about attentional processes. So, for learning anything, we need to pay attention. So, that is true for observational learning also. If you want to learn something by observing others, you have to pay attention, and this attention is also influenced by many factors as we discussed. The next step is retention process. Now, just paying attention is not good enough, you have to remember it, then only you can reproduce that action. So, that is called retention process, remembering. So, the process of retention involves remembering significant aspects of the model behavior and repeat it later. If you forget, you pay attention, but you forget it about, you cannot produce that. Okay? So, that is called retentional processes. To retain observed behavior, the information must be encoded and represented symbolically in your brain, like it has to be encoded in your brain, so that you remember it. And this encoding takes place in two systems. One is called imaginal internal representation and the verbal system. We remember information by using these two primary systems. One is in the form of images, one is in the form of verbal statements or verbal system, like languages and through language and so on. So, if you see this imaginal internal represent system, so we see something and we capture the image and remember it. So, that is called imaginal internal representation system. Here individuals form vivid, easily retrievable mental images while observing the model. Whatever we see, we can create an image of it and then remember that image. This mental images allows individual to summon up picture whenever they want to produce that. They can just remember that picture, what the person was doing. So, they can have a detailed image of that and accordingly they can produce it. So, these are imaginal internal representation system. This serves as the basis for lot of imitation in the later time. For instance, in observational learning, individuals form a mental picture of the model's behavior, which they can use as a guide for imitating features, for anything that we learn. Then obviously, verbal system, in the language format also we remember lot of things. It includes encoding verbal, observed behavior through verbal descriptions or codes. During observation, individuals may describe to themselves what the model is doing, creating verbal representation of the observed things. So, they can describe, okay, the first step the person did this, then they did this. So, you will be talking to yourself in terms of certain language. So, that is called verbal representation system. So, these verbal descriptions or codes can be rehearsed silently without overtly displaying the behavior. So, individual can mentally rehearse the sequence of behaviors they observe using certain language and verbally talk to themselves through steps of a complicated skills and so on. I have to do this, then I have to do this, I have to fix this and so on. So, we kind of talk to ourselves when we remember something that we learned. When individual wish to perform the action later, the verbal codes provide hints, reminder, cues and facilitate the imitation process. So, basically you have to remember it, and we remember it mostly in the form of images and in the forms of verbal or language format. So, this is the second step. So, you have to first you have to pay attention, then you have to remember it. The third step is you have to produce it, that is the production process. What is that production process? So, translating imaginal and verbal system representation into overt behavior requires production process. How do you then produce it? Now, you have remembered it, you have paid attention, you remember, now you have to produce it. So, that is the production process. How do you produce it? One of the best ways to do it is through practice. Despite attending, retaining and rehearsing representation, symbolic representation of the model's behavior, individuals may still struggle to perform the behavior correctly, particularly with high skilled action that required mastery of component. Even though you have paid attention, you remembered, you may not be able to produce it, especially if things are very complex, you know. So, practice is required for that. So, the practice or production process is necessary to translate symbolic representation into actual behavior. You have to practice it, then only you will be able to produce it. So, this involves physically performing the actions, other processes are all mental. Now, this phase is physically performing the action, whatever you have learned it, you know. So, production process may require practice of the action that you learned. For example, consider the process of learning how to drive a car. Now, while observing the model drive, individuals learn fundamental motions and create symbolic representation of the model behavior. Let us say you are learning to drive with someone else, you may pay attention, you may remember what the person is doing in terms of images, in terms of verbal format, everything is there. Then when you start driving, although you remember everything, you may not still be able to drive it. You may press the clutch too early or press the brake too early and so on, even though you remember all the steps. But when you actually do it, you may not be able to do perfectly. So, you need practice to produce that. So, actual behavior may require a lot of practices to actually produce that. So, practice of the proper physical movement along with feedback on their accuracy is essential to produce smooth and skilled performance. Especially the skills and complicated steps require a lot of practice to produce it. Attention and retention is not good enough. The last process is called incentive and motivational process. So, you paid attention, you remembered it, you even can produce it. Still you may not do something if you are not motivated to do it, if you do not have motivation to produce it. Motivation is very important, you know. So, no matter how well an individuals attend, retain and observe behavior or how much ability they have to perform them, they will not do so without incentives or motivational process. If they do not feel, why should I do it, what is the incentive of it, what is the reward for it, if they do not see any motivation to do it, they will not do it even though all the other things are present. So, when incentives are available, observation is more quickly translate into actions. Person may learn lot of things, but it will not translate into action if there are no incentives or motivations behind it. Incentive also influence attentional retentional process. Whenever there are incentives, you pay also more attention, you also remember more when there are incentives involved in it, and you are more likely to produce it. So, individuals may not pay as much attention without an incentive, resulting in the less retentional process. So, if there are no incentive, they will not pay attention, they will not retain it also, they will not have motivation to produce it also. So, it will influence all the other steps. Now, anticipation of reinforcement, or as we discussed, reinforcement here means reward and incentive is an important factor, but not necessarily all the time. So, our incentives to learn influence how our attention or anticipation of reinforcement or punishment. Seeing that a model's behavior produces a reward or avoids punishment can strongly incentivize the individual to pay attention. So, reward can play a very important role. When they say there is a reward, they are more likely to learn that actions. So, reinforcement is experienced vicariously during observational model, leading individual expect the performance of the same behavior will result in the same consequences. If they think that if I do this action, I am going to get more incentives and so on, then obviously they are more likely to learn that action. But as we said in the observational learning, incentive or reward is not always necessary. Bandura said that although reinforcement can facilitate learning, it can facilitate the learning process, it is not always mandatory in the case of observational learning. Many factors other than reward or consequences of the behavior determines what individuals attend to, retain and rehearse. For example, loud sound, bright light, exciting videos may capture interest even without immediate reinforcement. Because of the drastic characteristics of the things that you are seeing, you will automatically pay attention and you will remember that, you know. So, lot of this can happen, learning can happen even without any reward, especially when, so there is a very drastic characteristics of the stimuli that you are seeing, loud sound, bright light of any object, exciting videos, they can capture your attention and you may learn something from that, even though there is no incentive involved in it. So, Bandura's research demonstrated that children imitate models behavior observed on televisions or a video game, regardless of whether they have been promised a reward or not. Lot of children learn from observing others in the movies and TVs, especially the children, from video games and so on, whether they are promised a reward or not. They learn by observing. There may not be any apparent reward directly. Okay. So, still observational learning can happen. So, therefore, while reinforcement can assist, but it is not an absolutely mandatory things in the observational learning, but it can facilitate. Now, so there is another concept what Bandura talked about is called self-efficacy. This is also connected to the observational learning. So, self-efficacy is what? It is your belief, individual belief within himself or herself about their capacity to produce a behavior necessary for performance. So, whether they believe that they can do some actions and produce a result, or they perform something, they will be able to perform something. It is their internal belief that whether they will be able to perform some action, whether they are able to bring about certain changes. That belief is self-efficacy. It is a very psychological thing. So, Albert Bandura said he gave lot of importance to this concept of self-efficacy, which is also one of the important factors in observational learning. Self-efficacy will influence observational learning. While modeling remains significant in his framework, it is he primarily viewed through the lens of self-efficacy and so on. Let us see little bit more. So, self-efficacy is a very important component in the observational learning. Observational learning explains how we learn a behavior by looking at others. Self-efficacy determines whether we will actually perform that behavior. You might have learned lot of things, but whether you will be actually perform it, that motor production phase, self-efficacy is very important. If you think, I will be able to do it, then only you will do it. If you are doubtful, not confident, then probably you will run away and you may shy away in terms of doing that action. So, learning is not passive imitation. It is a very active cognitive process where self-efficacy is a bridge between knowing how and doing it. You may know lot of things, but actually doing it may require self-efficacy. You believe that I can do it. If you are not confident about it, then probably you will not do it. So, self-efficacy is linked to observational learning in that context. So, if you see all these 4 steps that we discussed of the observational learning, self-efficacy can influence all these 4 steps. First, attention. You are more likely to attend to some model if you believe you have the capability to learn it. If you think I can learn it, self-efficacy, you believe I can learn it, then only you will pay attention. Retention. Mental rehearsal of observe act is more effective when you believe the information is useful and attainable. Self-efficacy will also help you to code this information or remember this information, retain it, because you think you will be able to do it and there is some kind of relevance to it. This is where it is more important. Production phase, self-efficacy is most important. Even if you have the blueprint of behavior in your mind, you will not attempt it if you lack the self-efficacy to produce it. If you think I will not be able to produce it, even though mentally you know everything, you will still not do it, because you are not confident about it. Okay. So, this is how self-efficacy can influence. In motivation also self-efficacy influence. Self-efficacy provides the internal incentive. If you believe you can succeed, high self-efficacy, you are more motivated to practice and refine it. Then you will be able to practice it, refine it, because you think you will be able to do it. So, that will influence all these steps. So, what Bandura said, having skill is one thing and self-efficacy is another thing. Having just skill automatically does not translate into actions. Self-efficacy plays very important role. There are people who have they actually have lot of skills, but they lack self-confidence, they lack self-efficacy. So, even though they know a lot of things, they are not able to actually perform because of lack of self-efficacy. So, people may have actual skills and capacity, but still may not perform well in various actions in their life simply because they lack self-efficacy. So, self-efficacy is actually a very important contributor to performance despite having skills or not. Despite having skills, one may not be able to do it. So, this is a very psychological construct. So, competent functioning requires both skills and self-efficacy to utilize those skills effectively. You may have skills, but to utilize that skill effectively, you need self-efficacy. Both are required. Even if people have the necessary skills and strong sense of self-efficacy, then obviously another factor like incentive may also play out and so on. But the idea is having skills automatically does not translate into actions and performance. Self-efficacy is also an important factor. So, self-efficacy expectations shape individual choices and activities in the environment. It is because of the self-efficacy we choose lot of things, or lack of self-efficacy, because of lack of self-efficacy we run away from lot of situations. So, this self-efficacy judgments also dictates how much effort you will put, especially when difficulties comes in your life, when you find difficult challenges in life. Self-efficacy will kind of determine how much effort you will put, how much persistent you are in that actions. Whether you are able to maintain your effort, self-efficacy will determine that. So, this is a psychological construct, but plays very important role in our performance and actions in our life. So, according to Bandura, people with low self-efficacy are more likely to show certain behaviors. For example, they will avoid situation they perceive as threatening. People with low self-efficacy, they generally will avoid situations. Whenever there is some challenge, some difficulties, they will run away. When they must engage in such situation, their low self-efficacy leads to minimal effort and quick resignation. They will put very less effort and try to stop the behavior whenever there are some problems, Consequently, they miss out on corrective experiences that could boost their sense of self-efficacy. So, since they run away, their self-efficacy again decreases. So, it is a kind of vicious cycle. Because of low self-efficacy, they kind of avoid situations where they could get success. So, they do not get success, self-efficacy again decreases. So, this loop goes on and on. So, these are some of the examples. For example, a shy individuals may avoid social setting. If they attend social functions, they exert little effort to interact, often remain isolated. Now, these individuals are plagued by self-doubt and continuous self-criticism regarding their incompetence, leading to poor performance in various social contexts. This poor performance is reinforcement their low self-efficacy again. Because of their low self-efficacy, they do not put effort, lack of effort again they believe they do not have capacity. So, this is how the vicious cycle goes on and on. Similarly, people with high self-efficacy expectation, they choose more challenging tasks, often opportunities and skill development, they try to do that. In such situation, they exert maximum effort, persistent despite obstacles, engage minimum self-criticism, increase their chances of success and so on. So, behaviorally there will be this kind of impact if you have high and low self-efficacy, and self-efficacy mostly may not be universal, like in every context you will be high self-efficacy. It may be very domain specific. Your self-efficacy may be high in one thing, may be low in another thing, that is fine. People may not have high self-efficacy in everything that they do, but if you have high self-efficacy and low self-efficacy, your psychological impact will be very different. Now, research shows that people also model good behavior, bad behavior also. So, let us see some of the evidences of modeling of pro-social behavior, means good behaviors, helping behaviors. Research shows exposure to pro-social models, like if you look at other people helping other people. So, that is a model, someone else is helping someone else and you are looking at that. So, someone helpful non-violent behavior leads to increased helping behavior across culture and studies. Research shows that when people are exposed to other people helping other people or doing some good actions, they are also more likely to do that by looking at other people's behavior. So, pro-social models stimulates pro-social behavior. Not only real life exposure, viewing pro-social content in TV, movies and video games can boost later altruistic action. So, if you see some good content in TVs also and medias also, that can also have boost your pro-social tendencies. Real life modeling is equally powerful. Observing someone help, like picking up dropped books, increase the likelihood of helping others. So, both in real life and real life or in media, if you are exposed to good behavior of other people, you are more likely to imitate that. So, that is what research shows, that it increases the tendency. Influential leader like Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. used non-violent modeling to inspire large scale change in society. So, they became model for whole society and country, people like Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. So, they became a model for non-violence, and everybody looked at them and learned those actions, and they also, there was a kind of mass movement across the country and society. So, model could be so powerful sometimes, so that can create a change in the whole society. So, parents can play a very critical role in this context. Individuals who display strong moral courage, like rescuers during Holocaust, civil rights activists, often have parents who modeled humanitarian values. So, generally a child learns a lot of these values by looking at how the parents behaving. These parents are their first model. So, parental behavior plays very important role. So, a lot of people what they found actually showed a lot of moral courage and good behavior. Most of them could be linked to some of the good models by their parent, modeling of their parents. So, that could be one of the important factors. There could be other influence also, obviously, no doubt, but the influence of parent as a model could be a very strong impact, play a very strong impact on the mind of a child, and which can influence their later adult behavior and so on. Now, in this context, particularly when we look at good behavior and so on, what kind of model become more effective? What are the characteristics of that model? Now, we are not talking about those characteristics that we discussed earlier. Now, typically we are talking especially when you especially in the context of good behavior and so on, certain aspects of models behavior are more important. For example, children are more likely to adopt behaviors, good behaviors, particularly let us say religious behaviors or persistent behavior, when they see them practiced, not just preached. So, if they lot of people just preach, do this, and they themselves don't do it. So, generally people don't learn from them. A children learns from people who actually do that actions, not just say them. So, actions are very important, not just saying what you do. Children learns from actions more than what you say. So, active participation strengthens learning. For example, parents who practice let us say religious activities or any good activities with children increases the likelihood of children adopting those beliefs, because you are actively participating with them. Inconsistency weakens models, but still teaches something. When models say one thing, but do another, children often learn both messages. So, there are people who say something, do something else, inconsistency. So, children also get message that is also acceptable. So, they will learn this kind of inconsistent behavior also, that you can say something, do something else. So, still they will learn something, but it weakens the model's capacity to influence. Children tend to imitate behavior more than words, as I said. They may repeat what is said, but more strongly copy what is done. Hence, actions often speak louder than words, even in the context of observational learning. So, that is very important. Unfortunately, observational learning also increases negative behavior. So, that is the most disturbing part of observational learning, and people learn probably more negative things than positive things from the observational learning. So, negative behavior such as abuse, aggression, cheating, lying, etc. So, let us discuss one such applications of observational learning in the context of how looking at violence in the TVs and medias, how it impacts children. So, let us see some of the case as a case study of application of observational learning. So, aggression and violence in films, television and video games, what it does to children according to some of the research. So, violence and aggression acts are prevalent in society, with media playing a significant role in their portrayal. So, society it is there in the society, but media portrays it multiple time more than what is actually there. By the time an average child graduates from elementary school, they will have witnessed over 8,000 murders and approximately 1 lakh other acts of violence on television. Now, that is, remember, this is 1998 data. We can imagine what would be that data in today's world. I cannot even imagine the number of that. At that time, the exposure was much less. Now, exposure is everywhere, So, that number I cannot even imagine the number of what will be the number now. At that time, it was like in that period of from elementary school, when they graduate, they would have seen 8,000 murders, 1 lakh acts of violence on television, multiple time more in today's context, So, this exposure extend to news programs, music videos, law and order shows, films, video games, all of which depict violent acts, and it is increasing in today's world. Everywhere more and violence are shown everywhere, movies, particularly movies and so on. Critics often argue that media violence has minimum impact on behavior. However, Bandura's research on observational learning clearly says how violence can be serious and it can have a serious and harmful effects. While media violence may not be sufficient or necessary cause for many aggressions, it can facilitate aggressive behavior in individuals, particularly those who are low in impulse control or high in masculinity. It may not always stimulate aggression, but it can facilitate aggression, particularly some vulnerable individuals who are low in impulse control, who are hyper masculine kind of individuals who want to always portray their masculinity and so on. So, impact of violence, observing violence in media, films and so on could be much more impactful on this kind of individuals. Another common argument is that only disturbed individuals are affected by media violence, which is not true. Bandura counters this by citing research showing that under certain circumstances, even so-called normal individuals can be induced to act aggressively. So, Milgram's experiment in social psychology, which we will talk about in coming module, which shows even very normal healthy adults where just by giving some instruction they are able to harm some other individuals. Experimentally it was shown. So, it is not that only certain individuals will get influenced, certain individuals getting more influenced, but everybody can get influenced by that. Some other research evidence, Bandura research highlights the profound impact of media violence on behavior, demonstrating that viewers tend to imitate aggressive actions, especially when models are not punished. So, media violence will have much more stronger influence, especially when the children see that they are not punished because of the aggression. Observers who see models being rewarded for aggressive behavior are likely to repeat those behaviors more. As we said, reward will have more influence, while those see models being punished, probably they will not repeat them or they will repeat them less. However, even when models are punished, observer can still learn the disapproved behavior and might repeat them if incentivized later. Even if they see someone is punished for violence, they will still learn those behavior and may show those behavior when they get incentive for them. So, all these possibilities are there. A study found that in more than 5,000 hours of television program, violence went unpunished 73% of the time that was again 1998 data. In lot of this program, 73% violence was not punished in lot of these programs. Further research revealed that young observer imitate a model rewarded for aggression, even though they reported disliking for the model. Even they dislike certain models who show aggression, but still they can imitate certain aggression because they may find it exciting, even though they may not like it. So, that is also another angle to it, that why people can get into aggression or negative behavior, even though they see it is mentally understand it is not right. Simply the excitement factor could lead them to do it. This mirrors many television programs where the bad guy is rewarded throughout and punished only at the end in some programs, potentially leading viewers to admire the character despite his wrongdoing. Okay? Lot of people start admiring such violent characters and so on. So, research in 60s and 70s overwhelmingly supports this Bandura's claim or evidence of observational learning, especially exposure to violent media increases aggression. Studies show that repeated exposure to media violence during childhood correlates with higher aggressiveness in young adulthood and is significant risk factor for youth violence. So, this childhood exposure to this media violence could stimulate lot of such characteristics, and people when this child become younger and adults, probably they will show more violence, that chances become significantly higher, because their tolerance for aggression may increase. They simply can because of looking at this extreme aggression, the tolerance level will become higher. They will tolerate these things very easily. In late 70s, introduction of violent video games also has been linked to youth aggressiveness. Critics note that shooters in notable school killings lot of these US school killings where somebody came and just started shooting kids in the school, lot of these cases happened, and lot of research shows that this video game violence, these criminals were habitually playing violent video games, that could have one of the important influence of that. Although the connection is suggestive rather than conclusive, it is not necessarily just all the time this will happen, but at least research shows that violent video games may indeed increase aggression. So, chances of increasing these factors are much higher when they are exposed to this. So, that is something very clear in the evidence. Another factor that they Bandura said, that how can I use this information to modify the behavior in the behavior modification. So, Bandura introduced three forms of therapy kind of situation. One is modeling, by which we can actually train people for good behavior, guided participation and covert modeling. So, these three are kind of different ways of modeling by which we can promote positive actions and remove some negative actions. So, these approaches are basically applied in the context of fears, phobias, anxieties, in the case people have such kind of emotional problems. So, just very briefly look at that. So, Bandura demonstrated that modeling can be used. Since we learn a lot of things by modeling, it can be an effective method for relearning and changing our behaviors. Since we learn by observing, can we not unlearn it or learn something new which is more productive, more useful by observing also? We can learn that also, no? So, he applied modeling technique to eliminate fears and other intense emotional reactions. So, in a classic study of snake phobia, some people had very strong snake phobia, for example. Bandura and his associates successfully eliminated this intense fear of snakes in adults by using modeling only. So, the subject watched a film in which individuals of different age groups made progressively closer contact with the snake, starting from handling plastic snakes to eventually letting larger snakes crawl over their bodies. So, these phobic subjects were allowed to stop the film whenever the scene became too threatening, and gradually their fears of snake was overcome. Like slowly exposing to milder to more strong content related to their fear, and they learned it by observing how other people are dealing with it, healthy individuals. So, they can learn those behavior also. If they learn something negative, they can learn something positive also. So, modeling uses those techniques to change certain negative patterns of behavior. Another technique which is just another aspect of modeling is called guided participation, which involves watching a live model and then participating with the model. So, if you have certain kind of fear of certain objects, you can see a live model actually playing with that objects and you can participate with that. For example, for treating snake phobia, subjects watch through an observation window of a live model handling snake. Then they enter the room with the model and observe handling the snake in a close range, eventually wearing gloves, and subjects are coaxed into touching the snake and so on, like this. So, like this is here more of a participatory kind of modeling. Then this can also be done in a covert modeling format also. Subjects are instructed to imagine a model coping with a feared or a threatening situation. Here, rather than actual models, they can just imagine in their mind that how an model or a healthy model will cope in certain situation. So, they do not actually see a model. Covert modeling has been successfully used in certain phobias and so on. Okay. So, the idea is, if we learn lot of things by modeling, by observing other people, we can learn good things also. So, in certain situation when there are problematic things we learn, we can replace them with something good by observing other people who are modeling those things. Okay. So, these are some of the things about observational learning, the dynamics, the mechanisms and the factors that involves observational learning. So, with this I stop here. Thank you.